Deleted episode of Peppa Pig, Secret Disappearance. It was an ordinary sunny day. Peppa was playing in the garden with Rebecca. Suddenly, she noticed that her friend Rebecca had disappeared. She looked around. No one was there. The garden was silent. Peppa began searching for Rebecca all over the garden. Suddenly, she spotted a silhouette of her friend behind a large tree. The figure stood still, as if frozen. Rebecca's eyes were black as a bottomless abyss, and her face seemed made of shadow, as if it was dissolving into the air. When Peppa took a step closer, the silhouette suddenly vanished. At that moment, everything around started to distort. The trees appeared blurry. Sounds became muffled and echoed in her ears. Peppa felt a chill down her spine and a slight shiver, as if something sinister was approaching. Peppa tried to scream, but her voice got stuck in her throat. The figure began slowly approaching her, disappearing and reappearing again, as if playing a game of cat and mouse. The world around her started glitching more intensely. Colors blurred. Space seemed endless and unreal. At this moment, the figure disappeared just as suddenly as it had appeared. Suddenly, Rebecca ran out from behind the tree. She was running after Peppa with a desperate look in her eyes. Terrified, Peppa ran toward Rebecca's house. Inside, she saw a family of rabbits.
Something's wrong with Rebecca. She looks very strange.
Their faces were terrifying, twisted features, eyes glowing red. Rebecca's parents turned slowly toward her with mad eyes and asked,
"Who is Rebecca?"
Deleted episode of Peppa Pig. It was not worth going there. A cheerful atmosphere filled the house. Peppa, George, and Susie were gathering to watch a new cartoon. Mommy Pig was preparing treats, and Daddy Pig was telling funny stories. Suddenly, a strange creak sounded inside the house. Peppa and Susie exchanged glances, smiles fading from their faces.
"What was that?"
asked Susie.
"Probably just the wind,"
replied Peppa, but her eyes looked worried. The children decided to explore the house. In the bathroom, they noticed an old pipe pulsing slightly, emitting an ominous sound. Cracks were visible on its surface. Peppa, unable to resist curiosity, stepped closer. Suddenly, the pipes began to shake and whispering voices called out from within.
"Come down to us,"
they seemed to say from deep inside, and Peppa felt a shiver run down her spine. At that moment, Mommy Pig returned and sharply said,
"Children, don't go too close to the pipes.
Her voice sounded frightened,
These pipes could be dangerous."
but her warning only heightened their fear and their excitement. Unexpectedly, the pipes started stretching out like living creatures and grabbed George.
"Help!"
Shouted Peppa. Susie rushed to help, but was also caught.
"You won't escape."
A sinister whisper echoed, and Peppa realized they were trapped.
"What to do? We can't leave!"
Cried Susie. Peppa watched as the pipes pulled George into darkness. "Peppa! Susie!" he called out as his voice faded away behind the wall. Peppa and Susie were terrified.
"Don't let go of each other!"
Shouted Peppa, but it was too late. They felt cold tentacles of the pipes wrap around them, and soon they too were pressed against the wall, unable to move. At that moment, Mommy and Daddy ran into the bathroom, but upon seeing what was happening, they froze in horror.
"Peppa, George, run!"
Shouted Mommy Pig, but now the pipes began stretching toward them as well. The parents tried to run, but it was too late. The pipes seized them and they disappeared into darkness. When everything fell silent, only empty walls remained in the bathroom. Peppa and Susie, pressed against the wall, watched as the pipes became still again. Fear and despair flickered in their eyes. They understood that they had lost not only George, but also Peppa's parents. Deleted episode of Peppa Pig, Zombie Apocalypse. It all started as an ordinary morning. Peppa was playing carefree with George in the room when suddenly the sky outside darkened and the sun turned a toxic green.
What's happening, George?
Suddenly, a loud noise sounded from outside. George whispered, "Peppa, I'm scared." Peppa and George carefully descended the stairs. They saw their parents, wounded and bitten, with dark green skin and spots all over their faces. They were surrounded by zombies. Mummy Pig weakly muttered.
Help! We couldn't escape.
Daddy Pig shouted with his last strength.
Run quickly!
The house filled with zombie pigs. It seemed there was no way out. Peppa remembered that there was a basement in the house. She quickly grabbed Evie, took George's hand, and they locked themselves inside, trying to catch their breath and calm down. The basement was dark and frightening. They pushed through cobwebs. From above, they could hear crashes and screams. They stayed there for several hours, passing the time by rummaging through old things out of boredom. Suddenly, George found a cassette labeled, "The Time Has Come." They found an old player and turned it on. They heard their grandfather's voice.
My little pigs, if you're listening to this recording, it means they've found you. The fate of our city is in your hands. In the basement was a secret laboratory. Press 3 palms against the wall. A control panel will open. The entry code is 7221. In my lab notebook, find recipe number 666. Only it can cure all those infected.
Peppa exclaimed.
That's the recipe. We need to mix these ingredients.
They set to work, and even the process seemed fun to them. After several hours, the potion was ready. Peppa poured the vaccine into bottles and distributed it to all the infected. Gradually, everyone began to revive. The spots disappeared, and their skin color returned to normal. The city thanked its saviors. The Peppa family decided to celebrate this day. They sat in the kitchen with a cake and tea. But suddenly, a familiar roar was heard. It all started as usual. Peppa and George were playing with Evie, Peppa's younger sister.
Evie, George, let's build the tallest tower.
Suggested Peppa. Suddenly, Evie started complaining about stomach pain.
Don't worry, I'll help.
Replied Mommy. Peppa and George looked at their sister with concern. Daddy Pig went to the kitchen for medicine. As he was about to return, suddenly the lights in the room went out.
Strange,
said Daddy Pig. Suddenly, a huge black hand appeared from the darkness and grabbed him. When Daddy Pig didn't come back, Mommy Pig called Dr. Rabbit. She began examining her, but suddenly black, thin tentacles appeared from Evie's mouth.
Help!
Screamed Dr. Rabbit as Evie grabbed her and dragged her out of the nursery. Peppa and George watched in horror, unable to do anything. Meanwhile, Mommy Pig went down to the hall and stumbled upon a cocoon made of tentacles, in which Daddy Pig was barely visible. Suddenly, everything went dark again, and a second cocoon appeared nearby, this time with Mommy Pig inside. Now only Peppa and George remained in the nursery. No one could help them. They heard Evie's whisper approaching the door.
Evie?
Asked a frightened Peppa, looking toward the door. She appeared with a grim smile and completely black eyes, saying,
Now you are my toys.
It was an ordinary day. Peppa saw a new game on Daddy Pig's computer called Coin Collection. She started collecting coins, and everything seemed fun and harmless. At first, Peppa enjoyed the game, but day by day, she became more absorbed and lost track of time. Soon, dark circles appeared under her eyes, and the joy disappeared. One sunny day, Mommy Pig was tidying up toys in the nursery. She hadn't seen Peppa for a while and decided to check on her. Pig entered the room to turn off the computer, but what she saw shocked her. Peppa was sitting in her chair with wires connected to her head.
Mom, I'm almost at the final level.
Peppa exclaimed, her eyes clouded. Mommy Pig rushed to disconnect the wires, but as soon as she reached for them, Peppa raised her hand. Another wire appeared out of nowhere and plunged into Mommy Pig's neck. Soon she found herself next to Peppa, absorbed in the screen. Meanwhile, George and Daddy Pig were watching a show about Mr. Potato in the living room. George asked where Peppa was. Daddy Pig shrugged. George decided to check what was happening in the room. He entered and saw Peppa and Mama connected to the computer. He stood there, overwhelmed with fear, but before he could do anything, a wire shot into his neck as well. He too fell under the influence of the game. Daddy Pig also grew bored, sitting alone in the room, so he went to call the family for an evening movie. He entered the room and saw that everyone was now playing. Deciding to stop this madness, he turned off the computer. However, the screen still flickered on. Suddenly, a wire shot forward and connected to Daddy Pig's neck. He froze. His eyes clouded over, and he too succumbed to the game. Suddenly, the lights went out. Now the entire family sat on the sofa in the living room with empty eyes. Wires protruded from their necks. The TV flickered ominously, showing a terrible grimace. Daddy Pig, Peppa, and George decided to go for a walk by the pond. When they reached the bend, the path to the pond was blocked. A sign read, "Passage closed," but nearby there was another sign pointing toward the forest. Daddy Pig noticed a fallen signpost. He picked it up and said,
Probably this way.
A narrow trail led into a sparse forest. The further they went, the quieter everything around became. No wind, no birds, only footsteps. Suddenly, a duck appeared. Daddy Pig suggested following her as she might lead them to the pond. Peppa was wary of the duck's behavior. She seemed strange. The duck started moving chaotically, but no one except Peppa paid attention to it. It seemed like they were walking in circles. Same sign, same turn, but not the same place. George looked into a puddle and saw himself, but his reflection was going backwards. Finally, the pond, but it didn't ring with duck calls or splash like usual. It was waiting. The water was smooth, dark, unnaturally black. At first, one duck appeared, then two. Their eyes were red. Suddenly, the ducks grew into huge, toothy monsters and roared wildly as they swallowed George and Daddy Pig. Peppa stepped back, but she lost her footing and disappeared into the darkness of the ominous pond. She was falling, but not downwards, through images like through cracks in glass. Something was waiting for her below. Suddenly, all became normal again, but she didn't say a word. They returned home. Everything looked normal, almost. Peppa was standing at the window. She looked like Peppa, but only on the outside.